Hey guys, let's talk about Railjack. So Railjack's been in Warframe for a couple of months now, and the question is it good? I wouldn't say it's good just yet. It seems like it's a very bare bones prototype. There's not enough content there to keep you going for months or years on end, that's for sure. But Digital Extremes has definitely been working on Railjack for a very long time. You can tell that the developers, and especially Steve, seemed really excited about making a space game. And you can go way back to when Arkwing was released, and you can still see that excitement that, oh, we're going to have like actual like ninjas in space. When the Arkwing was added to the game, it wasn't received particularly well, and the same thing seems to have gone for Railjack. It seems more like it's getting shoehorned into the game, especially when they rushed its release. They tried to pull off this publicity stunt of announcing it during the Game Awards on YouTube. Rebecca Ford was up there live and said, Railjack's out now, go ahead and download it and try it. And we saw an uptick in players. There's about 20,000 more players at the peak than you would normally see around this time for Warframe, but that's not a very substantial uptick compared to some previous jumps. In the past, there's been jumps of 60,000 players or 70,000 players, so there was a lot of hype building up to Railjack, and it didn't seem to make that big of an impact on things. And I think that Digital Extremes needs to resist the temptation to hype things up so much, as it leads to disappointment. Players were disappointed because a lot of the stuff that was showcased during TennoCon did not make it into Railjack when it was released. We didn't have capital ship fights, the Kuva liches weren't integral to Railjack, you didn't see a lot of the stuff that you saw at TennoCon. But, I mean, that's not a huge deal for me. I think that they're going to keep adding stuff to Railjack, and eventually we'll see more features added onto it. But a big thing that a lot of players want to see, myself included, is for them to go back and polish old content or upgrade old content like they did with the Jupiter tile set. That was awesome. When they did the Melee rework, that was awesome. Those are good things to do, and I think some of us might be afraid that Digital Extremes will do this thing where they'll add something to the game that has the potential to be amazing, like the Kuva Lich system, and then just leave it in the dust and then go keep bulldozing forward and creating new content. Anyway, Railjack's in the game now. When Railjack was first released, I dove in and I built my I have my Railjack already ready. That's part of the hype, is that you could have your Railjack built and you could be looking at it in the dry dock and be like, when can I take this thing off? I started playing the missions on Earth Proxima, and what I noticed is that the difficulty ramped up really fast, and I wasn't acquiring enough resources in order to build upgrades fast enough to keep pace with the increasing difficulty. And before I knew it, it was my first night of playing Railjack, and I was on Saturn. And I was getting blueprints for Tier 2 weapons, and I hadn't even finished building my first Tier 1 weapon, and I'm going, okay, the resources I'm getting are way slower than what I need to upgrade my ship. And they've made some adjustments since then. They buffed up the amount of resources you get as end of mission rewards. They've made significant buffs to that. And also, at that time when I was playing, none of the clans had the research completed in the dojo, where you can just buy the upgrades without having to wait 24 hours to build them, and you would buy them at a discounted price. So now that it's been out for a while, and my clan and many other clans have all that research completed, the grind to upgrade your ship has probably been significantly reduced. You can just buy those, Sigma upgrades and follow this baseline as you progress through the Veil star chart. So there were a few weapons added to the game that are only obtainable through either real money spending or through playing Railjack. and that is the Quelor, the Pennant, and the Shedu. These weapons were fairly well received. The Shedu in particular was very popular. I saw and still see a lot of people using it. It's the first like full-on completely sentient weapon. It's like an arm cannon. It's really cool. The developers have done an amazing job with their weapons. They've made so many weapons in the game. They've gotten incredibly good at doing it. That being said, there are players out there saying that Digital Extremes needs to increase the amount of avionics capacity on their Railjacks because they can't fit all of the best mods on their ship, and I don't think that that's good criticism. I disagree with it. I agree with what Digital Extremes has done in limiting how much avionics capacity you have and limiting the amount of mods you can have on your ship. If you want to have every slot on your ship filled, you can do that, but you can't have every slot filled and have a bunch of super avionics hungry mods in every single slot. You got to make a compromise. And that compromise might be, instead of using the Zekti Hyperstrike, you use the Lavan or Vidar Hyperstrike, or, you know, instead of the Zekti Maxima, use Lavan or Vidar Maxima, and so on and so forth. That gives those mods reasons to actually exist. So imagine you had to choose between a super fast race car and a huge monster truck with giant monster truck tires on it. If you were complaining and saying, I don't want to have to choose between these two, I want to have them both bundled together in one. I want to have a super fast race car that also has giant monster truck tires on it. What would happen is, then the previous two options would become irrelevant. They become superfluous. There'd be no reason to choose a monster truck or a race car when you can just have your cake and eat it too and have them both together in one. And so it would create less diversity in builds. If everyone had unlimited avionics capacity or 200 avionics capacity and they could fit all these amazing mods, then no one would ever use these lower rank or less powerful mods. They would only use the most expensive, most powerful mods and put them all on their ship. And there would be less diversity in the builds. The way it is now, you have to sacrifice one thing to get another, and it becomes more of a field of preferences. There's a diverse set of Railjacks out there. When you go from one Railjack to another, you're going to see maybe one of them is using a Carcinox, the next one's going to be using a different weapon like the Cryophons or whatever you call them. One of them's going to be built to support arc wings, one of them's going to be built for speed, whatever. I like that. What they're doing is they're trying to create that kind of environment instead of there being one single best answer. And the players, oftentimes, there's this group of players out there that just bash that and really want them to make it clear that, okay, this is the best way. I don't like that. It gives rise to a meta that's very narrow and very repetitive and very boring. Like using Amisha, for example, and just ditching the Railjack, using Amisha with a Singus and a Hildren, and just soloing the content from your Arcwing. I don't think Digital Extremes expected that, and it just goes to show you how much they have, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, really how little they play tested it, for one. But secondly, I think they're underestimating how ridiculous power creep has gone off the rails in Warframe. And I've made a video about power creep. I've uploaded it to YouTube. Currently, it's private. I'm not really letting everybody see it. I'm thinking about working on it and re-releasing it. But yeah, power creep is definitely a problem in Warframe, and it needs to be dealt with. That being said, Railjack is a blank slate that Digital Extremes can build upon, and they seem a little bit resistant to over buffing or over nerfing things. And as expected, unfortunately, there's players out there already whining and complaining and saying that the enemies are too tanky and that the weapons aren't doing enough damage. And what this leads to is a game mode that's so easy it's mind-numbingly boring. People are already soloing the content, and it wasn't meant to be soloed. It was meant to be played with as a team. So we'll see what happens in the future. I really hope that Digital Extremes maintains their resistance to making this super easy mode. As a veteran player in Warframe, I need something that's challenging in the game. So here's some suggestions that I have. For one, I think that because I want to have more of a challenge, I think that they need to add something that's more difficult than the Veil with rewards attached to it, but only side grade rewards, not Mark IV weapons and gear on your ship. Still Mark III weapons and gear that you can put on your ship, but stuff that has some sort of side grade benefit, like a green laser beam that chains out to multiple enemies, or maybe a mine layer module, or you can drop mines behind your ship or something, but stuff that isn't a direct upgrade from the Mark III stuff. Then you can reach out and do more difficult content, and there's still an incentive to do that, but it's actually difficult. It's quite difficult, you know, and because it's a side grade and not a direct upgrade, maybe put a cosmetic stuff in there, for example, so that you don't have to do it if you don't want to. Okay, so, oh yeah, that being said, there's something else I want to say. Like, your ship is, as long as you never run out of pustules, which if you're going around picking up the items that are dropping in it, or you can just go and run a low-level mission and stockpile a bunch of pustules to prepare yourself for a high-level mission, your Railjack is basically invincible. Like, all you got to do is have somebody in there to patch the hole, and you won't die. Also, when you're in your Archwing and you board a cruise ship and you're inside the cruise ship when it explodes, you don't die. And that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, you're in there, you're inside a ship, it explodes, and you're completely unscathed, and you just go into Archwing mode. It's got this countdown timer, it seems kind of dramatic, it's like, oh, it's gonna blow up, and I just stood there and waited. I'm like, what's gonna happen if it blows up if I die? Nope. No punishment whatsoever. Why? Why are they catering to these super casuals? It's really annoying to me. Anyway, the enemies that are very tanky in Railjack, which is nice, but the problem here is that the players themselves are spread out. So you don't have all 4 players running down a hallway with their combined firepower just cutting through the enemies like a hot knife through butter, which is where we need to have tankier enemies. Is in those situations, we've got tankier enemies in Railjack, the enemies are spread out, so you've got really one player out there, or one player killing all the guys that are invading the ship, or one guy out on the cruise ship killing the guys out there. Now, mark my words, it's still easily doable. If you bring an endgame melee weapon, you're still going to cut through those guys like a hot knife through butter solo, but again, I'd like to see those tanky enemies put into situations where the combined firepower for Warframes meets that opposition, and maybe it will slow down the 4 players enough where they have to actually create some sort of synergy, or they actually can get a chance to use their synergies. Oftentimes in Warframe, you've got like one guy just flying through the content, melting everything, and then 3 other players running behind them, or you got 2 people just racing back and forth while one guy's killing one room, the other guy runs ahead to the next room and is killing guys over there, and they're just kind of piggybacking in order to compete with each other for who has the highest damage dealt by the end of the mission. Like, this just shows how pathetically easy the game is in its current state. So if you're a Digital Extremes person watching this, please address this. I think what they've done really well in the past, I don't mean for this to become a discussion only about difficulty, but man, it needs to be talked about. I think one of the things that they did really well in the past is disruption game mode, and the Grand Theft Auto mechanic that's in Fortuna, where you have your wanted level showing up on with the little red alerts, star levels. And if you want to, you can let it get to 4 stars, and then you're facing the Arachnoids and the robot, the Lynx machine gun robot with the shield in front of it. I think that's really cool because it gives players control over how difficult it is. I think that Fortuna was one good way of doing it, but I think ultimately the very best way that they have implemented difficulty control mechanics in the game is with disruption game mode, because you don't see this gamey Grand Theft Auto style star system in the top left, and you don't have like some slider pop up. It's like, how difficult do you want this to be? You've got a system in place where it's not so in your face and obvious. It's really hard to describe. If you want it to be difficult, just activate all 4 conduits, and you'll have these stacking layers of modifiers like reduced shields, electrical conduits, and faster enemies, or enemies do toxic damage, or so on and so forth. And as these stack up, it's like having a sortie with multiple sortie effects happening at the same time, or like a Path of Exile style map effects happening at the same time, these random effects that are map wide. And you'll have 4 demolists, and you can't just hang around one conduit. You got to go out there and hunt them and chase them down if you're activating multiple conduits. And you can still, you're not going to auto fail the mission. I really should make a disruption appreciation video at some point, but I think you kind of see where I'm getting here. What I'd like to point out with disruption in particular, what's really good about this difficulty in it is that you can make it more difficult, and you're not rewarded with higher tier rewards. You're rewarded with more efficiency. You actually finish each round faster if you activate all 4 conduits at the same time. And if you want to only activate 1 conduit at the same time, you aren't punished for doing so. You don't get any less rewards than you would get if you did it with all 4 conduits active. It just takes you longer to do it. I really hope that they can use that same balancing system where it's difficult but you get through it faster, or it's easy but you get through it slower, and put that somehow into Railjack. I don't know how they can do it, but I really hope that they do, because it seems like it's the best way to please everybody. Then the casual player that wants it really easy can have it their way, and then the hardcore players that want it to be difficult can have it their way as well. And I think everybody wins with something like that. So hopefully they can put that into Railjack. We still got a lot more to come in Railjack. There's still the capital ship fights. There's going to be some way of tying it together with the main game. I'm sure Digital Extremes is going to keep adding this stuff to the game and make it better. Now, I've got some notes in the background here on other things that I wanted to talk about in this video, so I'm going to pull it up right now. Just give me a sec here. It's worth noting that you can get access to Railjack very easily and very early on as a new player. All you have to do is get to Mars, and you'll have your rank 0 Odonata, and there'll be a button in the top right of the screen that has a picture of a Railjack. You click on it, and you can begin starting on the very first node on Earth and board other players' Railjacks and play Railjack content. I think this is a really good decision. It's great to get new players in there and experiencing and get their feet wet right away with Railjack. The problem, though, is that there's not enough low-level content for there to be much variety in the Railjack experience as a new player. Like I said before, the difficulty ramps up very quickly, so there's really only like the first, second, and third node of Mars, I would say, that a new player or a Mastery Rank 4 player could feasibly play. If you want to progress into Saturn and see a new tile set and see really reskin versions of old enemies, or get to the Veil, you're forced into grinding the same nodes again and again and again and again for quite a while. So they need to add way more low-level content, way more mid-level content to smooth out the transition of upgrading your ship and your Warframe and your Arcwing and whatnot, and get ready to do more difficult content and get to the Veil and hopefully beyond the Veil if you choose to. Okay, what else? Railjack bugs. I think Digital Extremes has done a very good job addressing a lot of the bugs. We all know that there were tons of bugs when it first came out. Thankfully, and I think really the really bad thing here is that they released Railjack. It had tons of bugs. They performed this publicity stunt, and then they all went on vacation. And that's not a good idea. Like, guys, you knew what you were doing, and then you all went on vacation. Like, come on. Wait until after your vacation and then do it. Okay, anyway, let's talk about the removal of rush drones. Rush drones were available for premium when Railjack was first released, and they've since taken it out, and I think that Digital Extremes definitely deserves some kudos and a high five and a thank you, because this is respectful for free-to-play players. It balances and levels the playing field between the paying player and the free-to-play player in terms of their progression through the Railjack system. So that's good. I'm really glad that they did that. let's talk about anomaly shards. This is a really good addition to the game. I'm glad that they did this. This is a very good response to player feedback on the grind that players were going through in order to get the new anomaly ephemera, the Tenebro ephemera, I think it's called, and the capture scenes there as well. So before the addition of anomaly shards, the only way to get those items was through random chance, through RNG, behind RNG, behind RNG. And I'm sure they did the math and they probably came up with this bell curve and we're seeing, okay, majority of the players, it's going to take about this long for them to get it, but there are those outliers. There's the really lucky player that gets it on the first try, and there's the really unlucky player that it takes many, many tries and they probably just get really disheartened and feel like quitting and giving up. And systems like this are obviously casino gambling-like systems, and I don't think they're very respectful to we, the players, as human beings, because it creates some unfairness, a lot of unfairness in some cases, and this big discrepancy between lucky players and the unlucky players. And it's also just demoralizing to be grinding and have this random chance of getting it and knowing that at some point you're going to get it, but not knowing, am I going to be one of the lucky ones or am I going to be one of the unlucky ones? And you have no control over that whatsoever. That's just not fair to the players. So, being able to get that anomaly shard and save up anomaly shards in order to buy the ephemera or the captures that you want is much better. So, I want to talk a moment here to talk about something else called variable ratio reinforcement schedules with reinforcement variety. This is what's used in casinos, it's what's used in SeaWorld, and it's what's used in free-to-play video games like Warframe. And let me break that down to you. Variable ratio reinforcement schedules means that you're going to get rewarded randomly when you do something. Not every time you do it, but sometimes when you do it. And reinforcement variety means you're not always going to get the same reward. Sometimes you'll get the capture scene. Sometimes you'll get an ephemera. So if you look at a casino, for example, randomly you'll get a reward when you pull on the slot machine. And the reward that you get is also randomized. Sometimes it's a small reward, sometimes it's a big reward, but there's something there to keep you going. Same thing with SeaWorld when they're training animals. They use this system to shape the animal's behavior to perform a certain task repetitively, and this has been studied and it's found that it works on any intelligent living creature to get them to drastically increase the rate with which they repeat a certain task and how long they will do this in the long run before they give up and quit. It's a very effective tool in shaping player behavior and getting players addicted to your game and playing your game a lot for a long period of time. But again, it's not very fair and it's manipulative, and human beings are intelligent enough to know what's going on, and we're sensitive to things that are not fair. So I'm really glad, once again, that they added this anomaly shard where you can accumulate the anomaly shard every time you run the anomaly, and if you don't get lucky, then there's a hard limit on how many times you need to repeat the process before you finally get enough shards and you can just go, look, I'm going to buy the thing that I want, just get it, and then I'm done. I don't have to grind it anymore. That's good. That's a good way of doing it. Similarly, they've done something with the Kuvalich weapons, and I'm going to give myself some kudos for this. I went onto the Warframe forums and I provided feedback in the Kuvalich thread, and there might be other people who provided the same feedback. I don't know. I just know what I said. And I said that I've got all these useless weapons with low rolls on their elemental stats. Can you make it so that I combine them towards, or combine them with my main Kuvalich weapon and increase its elemental roll by like 1% or 5%, just so I can get some value out of these useless weapons and I can see some incremental progress towards my end goal. It's important that I have these breadcrumbs to keep me going and to keep playing the content, because without them, again, I'm in that situation where I don't know how lucky or how unlucky I'm going to be, and I can't actually see my progress towards the end goal. So, that's a very good thing that DE did. I'm glad to see that they did that. let's talk about the lore at the end of the Veil when you perform the anomaly mission. It was forgettable to me. It was a cutscene. I think that it was interesting. It's nice to see some progress in the story, and I really love the story in Warframe, and I love the lore, but it was just a cutscene. There wasn't that much interaction between me and the story material, and I like it a lot better when you have that interaction between yourself and the story material. Like, for example, when you're in your operator and you can dash around and you're kind of avoiding being seen, for example, that feels a lot better than just sitting there watching. And what I noticed with this one is that there was no reason for me to dash around. I'm just sitting there watching what's happening, and I was testing it, and I'm just like, okay, are they going to see me? Can I just sit here and watch? And I sat there and I watched all the way to the end, and it just felt really passive, and I don't really like that. I can just go on YouTube and watch a movie if I want that kind of experience. I'm playing a video game. I want to interact with the story material, and I want the story material to react to me, to my input. So it was a little bit disappointing in that regard, but in terms of the actual story material, which is what I think they, obviously put the most effort into here, it's cool. It raises some questions. I think you can see your own operator there at the end, which, it's kind of cool. They're like, okay, here you are. You're a part of the story too. Don't forget that. Yeah, I think I've said everything I want to say about that. Okay, so I got my final thoughts here. I've got some notes. I'm just going to read off of that. I expect that Railjack will get better and more fleshed out over time. I think that they need to refrain from caving in on all the player complaints and make it easy mode. They need to refrain from making it easy mode. They need to have some sort of difficulty slider or difficulty control effect so that hardcore players like me can have really difficult content and be rewarded with efficiency, and easy mode players can have an easy laid back experience, maybe at the cost of taking more time to get to the end. They need to have something that's beyond the Veil, that's more difficult than the Veil, because currently as it stands, the Veil is not difficult enough. They need something actually harder than the Veil, and I've already said this before, it needs to be harder than the Veil with side grade rewards. And that's it. Okay, well, thanks for watching. I put a lot of effort into this video, so I hope that it gets a good amount of views. For example, I've got a video that's got about 8,000 views, and I only spent 15 minutes working on it. I recorded it, I did not do any editing, and I just slapped it up on YouTube, and it got 8,000 views. That's my how to play any song on the Shawzin video. And yeah, I've spent like 8 hours working on my video called the Kudos Endgame, and it got just over 100 views, which is pathetic in comparison to the super easy one that I made. So if you like this video, one that I actually put a fair bit of effort into, then maybe you would like my Kudos video, and I'm going to put a link for that video at the end of this one, so please check it out. I think that video did not get enough attention or get as much attention as it deserved, and I plan on either re-releasing or unhiding my video on power creep and Warframe. Power creep and Warframe definitely needs to be talked about, and I want to talk about it. And I want an audience that also wants to talk about it, is interested in addressing it. And that's it. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.